football at 4 every day. John McMullen joins us on 97.3 ESPN. Josh Hennig got you the rest of the way. Of course, text board is open at 609-403-0973. We got some football to talk about because the Super Bowl is this Sunday. The Eagles have officially lost a member of their front office who was only really here for a hot minute. We'll get into that and more with John McMullen. Follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen. That's JF McMullen on Twitter for all your Eagles and NFL news. And he joins us like all guests do on the Warwalk Honda Hotline. John, how you doing today?
Doing well. How are you, Josh?
I'm doing well. I mean, I'm not doing as well as Andrew Berry's doing. I mean, he's making a lot more money than I am, but I'm doing well, John.
That's good. He's got a 5-year deal as well. So
yeah,
that typically lasts 1 year in Cleveland.
Oh, I was going to say 2 years, but all right. John, I wanted to start with Andrew Berry, though, because I know the news came out this morning. The Browns officially announced it. People can check out your story at 973ESPN.com. I think it's just another example of, listen, this guy was really only here to put himself in position to get this kind of job, right? Like, it's not like he was really in Philadelphia as an integral part of the front office.
Well, yes and no. He was definitely an integral part of the front office. He was second in command to Howie Roseman on the football side. So it was a legitimate job. He was involved in every aspect. Sort of, best way I describe it is he was the assistant GM in essence. And a lot of teams around the league have that tag, have that title. Eagles did not before Andrew got here. His official title was Vice President of Football Operations. So it was significant. And they didn't want to lose him. They liked him. But there's no question from his perspective, his goal was to become a general manager. He's now the youngest general manager in the NFL. So he's very highly thought of. He's very well regarded around the league. Carolina wanted to talk to him. The Eagles blocked that. They weren't able to block the Browns because the Browns were willing to give him contractual power over personnel. So once you get that on paper, that's one of two jobs you can't block in NFL hiring practices. The only other is head coach on the coaching aspect, on the coaching front. So no, he was a big part of this organization, big part of the plan. They liked him a lot. He just got a better offer. In a lot of ways, I've compared it to Cleveland's version of Jeffrey Lurie with Chip Kelly and Howie Roseman. He regretted letting John Dorsey do what he wanted. He trusted Paul Pederson and Andrew Berry more. Didn't listen to them, and now he's sort of reversed course and gone back to where he was before John Dorsey convinced him to elevate Freddie Kitchens.
So where do the Eagles go from here? Do they promote from within? Do they try to bring in some more people from the outside to bring in new ideas? What do the Eagles do with the realignment of the front office?
I don't think they do anything. Andrew's job didn't exist before he got here. That's not to say if they find somebody else they think has a good trajectory to that particular position, they can add somebody. When they hired him, they described it as just adding talent to the front office. In other words, he didn't take anyone else's job. They created a new job for him. And if you look at a flow chart, in essence, it was a buffer between the three vice presidents, personnel, which was Joe Douglas, now it's Andy Weidel, football administration, which is Jake Rosenberg, analytics, which is Alec Hallaby. All of those guys were here. They're still vice presidents, but Andrew was above them. Before Andrew was here, nobody was above them. It was just Howie Roseman. So you no longer have that second layer. I certainly don't think they look at Weidel as somebody who could do all those encompassing jobs, and certainly not Alec Hallaby. Rosenberg is very close to Howie Roseman. certainly doesn't have any experience on the personnel aspect. So it's kind of hard to find somebody who can marry everything, and that's what they liked about Andrew Berry. He's a Harvard graduate, an MBA. He's a really smart guy. He worked in personnel with Indianapolis and Cleveland. He embraces analytics. He likes that part of it, and he's good in contracts and strategy. So he was a true GM type, and that's why they brought him here.
John, we know that one of the things with the Eagles has been also in the news, and you wrote about it at 97.3 ESPN.com about the whole offensive coordinator situation, how they're taking their time. You wrote the article, A New Idea for Jeffrey Lurie. And in reading the article, I did have a name that immediately came to mind, and that is, would there ever be a possibility, and I'm not saying it's impossible, but I find it interesting that, you mentioned a lot of different ideas and a lot of different things in the article. I suggest people go and read it because you kind of, you take the topic and make it a little bit big picture when it comes to Jeffrey Lurie. Why haven't the Eagles interviewed a guy like Mark Helfrich?
Well, there's a couple things, and I think the larger part of it is I think people overrate scheme in the NFL. I think in one of the examples I gave was Graham Harrell, because a lot of it was spun as that's an innovative guy, that's a young guy. And the reality is it's kind of the exact opposite. And even Graham is on record saying numerous times the air raid offense, what it's about simplicity. In a lot of ways, I think people are falling down the same rabbit hole they did with Chip Kelly, assuming simplicity is somehow innovative or difficult or a new idea. And if you look at any spread offense, it really dates back. And I think this is the interesting part. LaVell Edwards is the godfather of all of that, the old BYU coach, and that's where Andy Reid started. And I think it's so funny because who has married the West Coast concepts with spread concepts better than Andy Reid? The answer, nobody. That's maybe, if not the best offensive mind in football, certainly amongst the top two or three. So getting to the larger point, the assumption that Doug Pederson needs somebody who understands spread offense, he mentored under the guy who understands it better than anybody else. And even if you don't believe that, what do NFL teams do? And this is the example where I use Press Taylor in the Philly special, because that is the most famous play in Eagles history. Well, Press Taylor got that from a Chicago Bears game in a meaningless Week 17 game against Minnesota. They ran it on a 2-point conversion. He liked it. He ran it up the flagpole. The Eagles put it in the offense. The rest is history. The assumption that Doug Pederson can't watch film and get new ideas is just, it's at best specious, at worst just flat out dumb. So this whole narrative is nonsense, is my point. The problem with the Eagles last year was personnel. That's it. They overachieved offensively. So the spin on this as they need new ideas, they need a smart, innovative offensive mind, it's just selling something that doesn't need to be sold. If they get better players, they'll have a better offense. Doug is not the problem calling plays.
All right, so that opens me up to two questions. The first question I have then, John, is it fair to say that the majority of people who have been asking and talking about the Eagles' search for the offensive coordinator totally then misunderstand Doug Pederson and his offense then?
Well, they misunderstand the complexity of different things. In other words, if someone, and I'm not trying to pick on Graham Harrell, but only I'm using him because he was in the mix until he pulled out. And a lot of people got very excited about that. And the people who did don't understand how simplistic that offense is. And again, if you don't believe me, listen to Graham Harrell. Google him. read interviews and stories about him. He proclaims numerous times the effectiveness of the air raid is due to the simplicity and getting players to play fast. It's not a complicated offense. We've been through this literally, and this is the part that surprises me, Josh. We've been through this with Chip Kelly. Everybody fell for the same trap. Oh, he's so innovative. This is so complex. It wasn't complex. It was about going fast. That's it. It was a one-trick pony. And everybody lined up in the same position. You ran the same 6-7 plays. It was the most simplistic offense in the history of the NFL based on one thing, going faster than everybody else and making the defense tired. That was it. And people figured that out at the end, and now they're falling in the same trap. And my joke has always been, what was Chip's, and I forget, I'm getting old, Josh, what was Chip's play card? What was it, S3, I think it was.
I think it was S3,
That big S3. And I always joke, his play card says S3, and Doug's offense is basically the menu from the Cheesecake Factory. And they think Doug is the dumb guy and Chip is the smart guy.
But, John, they think they think he's a dumb guy, though, because of the fact that people judge him on how he speaks and not how he coaches. And that's the problem. People take perception and make it reality instead of actually judging what reality is and then having a perception.
Well, and that's exactly it. But I get it to a certain degree from a fan base perspective. And I said it if it was about winning press conferences, Chip would have had numerous Super Bowl rings by now. We all know what has happened to him. He's a very wit guy, very good on his feet. Always had a quick quip ready to go. That's not what it's about. And it is, I think it's ironic that you've seen this offense when the players are playing at a high level. You've seen them integrate RPOs. You've seen them integrate spread concepts. He came into this season. The plan was Deshaun Jackson and Alshon Jeffrey and Nelson Aguilar, a ton of 11 personnel. You would have seen spread concepts. They had to shift 12 personnel because of all the injuries and all the ineffectiveness at the receiver position, and they were still able to make the playoffs. And yet, the problem is it's coming from the front office. The front office is almost acting like the fan base and saying, oh, we need to play this way. Well, guess what? Doug would have played that way. Doug prefers to play that way. Doug couldn't play that way because he didn't have the personnel to play that way. And that, I think, is the more concerning point. I don't think it's a concern that a lot of the fan base thinks that. I think it's a concern that the owner seems to think that way.
John McMullen joins the Boardwalk on the hotline on 97.3 ESPN Football at 4. Follow him on Twitter at JFMcMullen. So that leads me to my second question. You mentioned about the personnel. Where do we place, I don't want to say the blame, but the onus on they have to do better? Is this an entire front office issue? Is this a Howie Roseman issue? Is this they were making the transition from Joe Douglas not being here anymore issue? What is the origin of this issue for the Eagles and personnel this past year?
Well, I think a lot of it was sentimentality, which Howie admitted at his season-ending press conference. He admitted he gets attached to players, and then he went and hired Connor Barwin, but that's a different subject, which I also wrote about. And I found it ironic because he's bearing his soul in this press conference, admitting he's got too much sentimentality. And then he gave the hint that he was going to hire Connor Barwin. I just found it hilarious, but not being self-aware to realize.
Well, he was giving an example, John.
So, I mean, age, Darren Sproles we talked about, and Deshaun Jackson and the injuries of a lot of the aging players, that was a problem. I think clearly, as a lot of GMs, he's also in the category that he's going to give the benefit of the doubt to his draft picks, and probably more benefit of the doubt than even the average general manager. Mac Hollins being the perfect example there. Shouldn't have made the football team. Never mind got opportunities to play after the injuries. The injuries, that's bad luck in a lot of ways, except for the older players. I mean, you have to factor that in, that the older you get in the NFL, the more likely there's going to be some injury issues at certain points. And your hope is maybe it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks instead of a whole season. But nonetheless, you're playing a dangerous game if you get too old. So he made notice that he's got to get younger. He's got to get away from that sentimentality. We'll see if he can do and accomplish some of these things. But I think, and I say this about every offensive scheme in the NFL, if you got good players, you're going to be fine, because that part of it is overrated. The NFL is more about execution than scheme. All these guys, and we always called it a copycat league, Josh. It is a copycat league. They spend all week just looking at film. They look at other offenses. Whose ever offense you like, Andy Reid's, Kyle Shanahan, they're getting ready for the Super Bowl. Guess what? You can watch it on film. You can steal plays. It's not against the law. So this league is about execution. It's not about scheme.
John, you mentioned copycat league. What do you think then is going to be the ultimate copycat element taken away from either both or one of these two Super Bowl teams? Because we know every year there's a type of player, or there's a situation, or there's a coaching concept that is, reappropriated. So what do you think is then going to be the big copycat? I remember a couple of years ago with the Eagles, everyone wanted to have a trick play, right? Well, what is going to be the copycat element from this Super Bowl?
Well, I think a lot of people are going to look at Kyle Shanahan's run game, and I think you've already seen. I'm not going to say fullback is making a comeback, but I do think there are a few more. I think 7 this year. Cleveland just signed a fullback. Kevin Stefanski's there today. Their run schemes, I think Bill Belichick did it really a couple years ago. He's always ahead of the curve, and everybody was going because everybody's playing 11 personnel, so everybody's got beefed up linebackers who are glorified safeties and smaller guys who can't tackle. And all of a sudden, last year on the way to the Super Bowl, Belichick just put a fullback out there and ran everybody to death. And that's sort of what the 49ers are doing. And George Kittle as well as a tight end who can block. You're seeing the pendulum shift a little bit. And guys are saying, you're going to put 220-pound linebackers out there who can't tackle, who can't shed blocks. I'm going to run it down your throat. And I think that's the shift you're seeing.
Could also allowing teams to maybe run the ball more be another opportunity to cover up some of the poor offensive line play in the league? Because we know some of these offensive linemen, they just do not have the technique, the athleticism, or frankly, the ability to block some of these elite pass rushers. Could maybe teams start turning to running the ball as a better cover-up for these offensive line issues?
Yeah, that's another part of it as well, because if you look at some of the what I call the good teams with bad offensive lines, Seattle would be in that category as a playoff team. Minnesota would be in that category. They both run the ball pretty well, and that's a part of it as well. They can't pass block, and they certainly can't pass block against great pass rushers. And there's a whole heck of a lot more good defensive linemen in this league than good offensive linemen. So, yeah, that's part of it as well, in the fact that you can't pass block these guys anyway. And they're undersized as well. compared to what they used to be. A lot of the edge rushers in this league, for the same reason I just described with linebackers, because it's all about movement. It's all about quickness. It's all about trying to get to the quarterback. How can you compete with that when you don't have athletic or as you mentioned, offensive linemen who learn technique at an early level? Hey, blow them off the ball.
John, a couple around the league news I want to touch on with you. The Houston Texans did announce today that Bill O'Brien has been promoted to now general manager. So we have another one of these head coach / GMs in the league. I remember when this was a really hot, popular item when guys like Holmgren were doing this all over the league. And it seems like that Mr. McNair is fully invested in Bill O'Brien as the overseer of the football operation, for better or for worse, John.
Yeah, and it is. You know, you can't do both jobs. So a lot of it is just ego stroking, for lack of a better description, because all it says is you have power over personnel. You have to delegate that responsibility. You certainly can't do any college scouting or even pro scouting, to be honest, during the regular season, because as a head coach, you got to spend all your time preparing for the next game, and you have all the ancillary details as well, dealing with the media, logistics, setting up practice. It's a big job, and you can't do two big jobs. So it comes down to you have to delegate anyway. So obviously you have to hire people you trust. And the guys who are successful, Bill Belichick would be number one, as he usually is. Hires the right people, hires the people he trusts. They do what he wants, and it works out. The other people who try to do too much, and there's more failures than successes, they're going to find out very, very quickly you can't do those two jobs. So, you know, I always say power over the final 53 is overrated, and my best example of that is, you know, we have the beat writers pool every year. Last 3 years, I think I got 52, 52, and 51 of the final 53. So if you're at practice every day, it's pretty clear who's going to make the football team. Even the people like us, never mind the coaches and the scouts. So when you talk about power over the final 53, you might be talking about one player, two players that a coach might like and a general manager might like somebody different. So from a coaching perspective, great. You can only dress 46 anyway. So if you're going to fight for that 52nd and 53rd guy, if it makes you feel better, great. But I don't think it means that much.
John, one more news I want to get to with you is the news that Dante Scarnecchia, the longtime, he retired once before, then he came back, Patriots offensive line coach. Well, he's retiring again. The quote is, "I'm 72 years old. I feel like it's time." So what are the Patriots going to do, John? We know that they had to get Scarnecchia back there when they were struggling a few years ago. Where does Belichick go now for his offensive line coach?
It's a good question. I mean, that's regarded as the best offensive line coach in the NFL. Now probably Jeff Stoutland would be in that conversation. And those Bears moved on from Harry Hiestand. I'm not sure. I don't think he's gotten another job. He was at Notre Dame before he went to Chicago. You look at all those Notre Dame guys. We just talked about technique issues. Zach Martin, Quentin Nelson, Ronnie Stanley. Those are all Hiestand guys, and they come into the NFL ready-made. I always joke, if you draft offensive linemen from Wisconsin, Iowa, Notre Dame, you're going to be fine.
Right.
So there's one guy who could be out there. But, I mean, if anybody has an encyclopedic knowledge of people who know this game, it's Bill Belichick. Even great position coaches, it's about personnel. We started this conversation with personnel. It'll end with personnel. If you got good players, it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, it does. John McMullen joins us every day, football at 4. Follow on Twitter at JF McMullen. Check out all his work at 973ESPN.com. John will be back on tomorrow as well as the rest of the week as we get you each day ready and closer for Super Bowl 54. John, we'll catch up with you tomorrow.
Hey, thanks, Jess.